Alright, lads, so today we got some pretty exciting news regarding the next character releasing in Bleach Ssr Resonance. Yesterday, we did speak about the character, of course, that being Mayuri and what he could potentially offer, considering the fact that yesterday he was pretty much confirmed to be the next character. Now, since then, over 24 hours, a few things have changed. Now, the character does seem to be a Frost-type support. Yesterday, when we did talk about it, it was a Spirit-type support, but now it does seem like he's locked in to be a Frost-type, and that ultimately does make sense, especially with Nelliel being the newest character. It seems like they want to get the Frost team completed, and with Mayuri, that team is definitely going to be completed, because right now, before we have a look at the character's kit, he looks to be absolutely insane. But with that said, do keep in mind that since we are talking about leaked content here, the character could change when he does release this time next week. When we have spoken about characters leaked in advance, for the most part, they stay the exact same, but some little things do change, whether that's a number change. For example, when we spoke about Gin, the character stayed the exact same, but a lot of numbers did change, and he still ended up being a very good character. And then in the case for Kenpachi, he pretty much stayed the exact same, although one of his core passives did change from a crit rate increase to an attack percentage increase. So keep that in mind with Mayuri. I think what we are looking at here is what we are going to see in a week's time with his release, but certain numbers could change. Maybe the amount of buffs that he does give is going to get changed a little bit, because right now, I will be honest, it does look crazy, and if it does release like that, Mayuri might be a must summon. So with that in mind, what exactly are we looking at here with Mayuri? Remember, like mentioned, he is going to be a support Frost character, and I think if we specifically look at his core passive, it does paint a good picture on how this character is going to play. So as stated here, casting techniques grant additional spiritual pressure, and when his spiritual pressure gauge is full, the technique itself becomes super gift. So we'll talk about it when we get to the technique section of the video, but Mayuri is going to have multiple different techniques. They are in a way going to be randomized, but he is going to have a more powerful one, which can only be accessed when the spiritual pressure gauge is full. And that attack itself is going to be called Super Gift. Now with that, as expected, Mayuri is going to inflict poison. So as stated here, Mayuri and Nemu's attacks can apply a poison. And when the poison gauge is full on the enemy, it triggers poison damage equal to 30% of Mayuri's attack, which that in of itself is relatively low, but he is a support character, so it is fine. He's not really maybe here to deal a lot of damage, potentially. Again, we have to wait and see until the character does release, but when Mayuri does trigger poison damage, the team gains 1 stack of excitement, increasing all allies' element mastery by 30% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. So ultimately, through applying poison, you can get 60% element mastery. As a support, this character is going to be all about giving damage buffs to the team, and we're now seeing the start of that. Specifically, he is going to be an element character. And it does make sense, this character is going to want to inflict poison. He himself is likely going to want to deal element damage. And a lot of the characters that we have been getting, Gin, Kenpachi, and also Nelliel, do also want to inflict element damage. So being able to increase that is going to be really good for the team he wants to be used in, with Nelliel and also Gin, but maybe even used alongside Kenpachi. Because despite him being a Frost character, what you are going to see is that he doesn't really give any Frost damage boosts, so you likely will be using this character alongside any element damage character that is present or upcoming in the future, potentially Grimmjow, for example. Continuing on, however, having a look at the character's basic attack, Mayuri strikes the target at close range, dealing 6 hits, totaling 30% of his attack, and his basic attack combo can apply poison on hits. So a simple basic attack, but as you'll see here, is that he can actually summon Nemu to attack, specifically during his special attack, which from the looks of it can only be used once this character does use a technique. So it might be very similar to other characters, where after using a technique, after pressing the basic attack button, Nemu will then appear, dealing an additional attack. Where in this case, as stated, Mayuri calls Nemu to assist in battle. Nemu performs a spinning kick, sweeping enemies like a whirlwind, dealing 50% attack damage in total, and also applying poison. So what I'm really hoping here is that maybe Mayuri isn't going to be locked into the animation. So when Nemu does appear, she'll be just doing the attack by herself, and you can maybe switch into another character to start an additional follow-up attack. But if you were wondering why Nemu was mentioned in the core passive, that is because she is also part of Mayuri's kit, which is really cool. So while it's unfortunate that you might not be able to use Mayuri alongside Nemu, as she is a strike support character, at least you can technically use them because Nemu is part of Mayuri's kit. Continuing on, let's have a look at Mayuri's technique. So having a look at this page, there's kind of a lot going on here. So as stated here, Mayuri considers which troll to use and randomly selects one of the following. He will either use Flesh Tonic, Superhuman Drug, or Flesh Bomb. So I'm really not sure how big of a fan I am with the fact that this character does have some RNG involvement, but I think it's kind of cool. I'm sure it's not going to really matter that much in gameplay, but I am a fan that one of the attacks in particular is the Superhuman Drug, so I am glad that's included. But as we saw in the core passive effect, every time you do use a technique, it does grant spiritual pressure, and when full, his technique is replaced with the super gift, which is going to be the better, most powerful technique that he does have access to. So firstly, having a look at his Flesh Tonic skill. Flesh Tonic instantly recovers the HP of all allies equal to 7.5% plus an additional 5% of Mayuri's attack. I do like that it is scaled off his attack percentage, very similar to Neliel, for example. And then on top of that, you will also restore 100 HP per second for 5 additional seconds, so guaranteed healing 500 extra HP. But this skill in particular will only appear when one ally is not at full HP. So potentially if you are playing safe and optimally and no one has taken any damage, you'll then be guaranteed to get the better alternative technique, which could be Superhuman Drug or Flesh Bomb. Superhuman Drug, however, does slow down the enemies in range for 2.5 seconds, and upon a successful cast, enemies will take increased damage for 15 seconds. We don't have a number here, but being able to debuff the enemy for your allies to deal more damage is never not going to be a good thing, so I do like that effect. And then Flesh Bomb states here that when Mayuri throws a Flesh Bomb at the enemy in front of him, it will deal 7.5% of his attack and additionally reduce their spiritual pressure by 45 while also applying poison. So I think preferably you do want to get the Flesh Bomb off so it does apply poison, so you can get that element mastery damage boost from his core passive effects. But being able to lower the enemy's spiritual pressure is also going to be a good effect to have. And then the last technique that he does have, again, can only be used when his spiritual pressure is maxed. We have the Exceptional Punishment in brackets Super Gift effect. So Mayuri throws a Flesh Bomb and Toxic Gas at the enemies in front of him, dealing 80% of his attack damage, while also reducing their spiritual pressure by 17%, and upon a successful cast, enemies take increased damage for 15 seconds. So basically what you're getting here is the Superhuman Drug and Flesh Bomb effect in one. You're lowering their spiritual pressure gauge, you're making them take more damage, you're dealing more damage, and you're also applying poison. So I think it's quite crazy to see a character with 4 different techniques, but I think all are good and have their place. And what we're seeing here is that he can be quite an offensive support character, but also defensive support character, providing heals when your team does need it. Having a look at the character's ultimate, it's actually the most simplest part about this character's kit. As expected, his ultimate will be him activating his Bankai, and Ashisoki Jizo descends from above, attacking the enemies in a large area in front of him, dealing damage upwards to 150% of his attack. After casting the ultimate, all allies gain 25% technique damage for 30 seconds, and this effect does not stack. So a 25% technique damage increase that is going to be really good for a lot of characters, but especially Gin, who is all about dealing technique damage. So really good team effect, but it is kind of funny that the most simple part about this character's kit is the ultimate. It deals damage and gives you a technique damage increase by 25% for 35 seconds. Unfortunately, the effect does not stack, but that in of itself is still a good buff nonetheless. And then I guess the last part about the character's kit built into him, we do have his passive boost effects. His first one increases the charge rate for his ultimate by 15%. Keep in mind that these skills are all at level 1, so this is very similar to Kisuke, funny enough, and I believe that will likely go up to 20% through levels. His second boost does increase the amount of element mastery that he does have by 30%, and then the third boost does increase the efficiency of him being able to apply poison on the enemy by 22%, and likely again will go above 30% through level ups. So that's pretty much everything Mayuri does have in his base kit. Doesn't seem that crazy, right? He has some good buffs, he has some good effects, but it starts to look a lot crazier once we have a look at Mayuri's stamps. So if we have a look at his weapon stamp, upon entering the battlefield, Mayuri immediately gains full ultimate energy, so you can let off his ultimate straight away, instantly gaining that 25% technique damage boost. Alongside that, upon entering the battlefield, you will also instantly gain 100% of your spiritual pressure. That way you can get the super gift effect on the technique, which will lower the enemy's spiritual pressure. increase the damage that they do take, and also instantly apply poison. And then the third effect is damage dealt by Mayuri's technique is increased by 1000%, and the healing effect is increased by 2000%. So that's something that we didn't speak about, but if you were looking at Mayuri's numbers here, despite being level 1, they are very small. As expected, a support character maybe isn't going to deal a lot of damage, but his numbers at the base kit were very, very tiny, like 7.5% of his attack. 80% of his attack is very, very low. So through the weapon stamp, his rotation is going to be a lot better. You're going to be able to get his max boost straight away, as you instantly get access to his ultimate and also enhanced technique. And it's also going to increase his damage output and healing effects by quite a lot. Fortunately, getting weapon stamps aren't too hard in this game. You're guaranteed in 4. And every character, for the most part, has always wanted their weapon stamp. If you can't get their weapon stamp, more often than not, it's not even worth getting the character. But in the case for Mayuri, getting a weapon stamp is going to be very, very important. But moving on to his core stamp, ultimate damage is increased by 15%. And each stack of excitement, which remember you can get by applying poison, now grants the team an additional 25% attack boost. So also very important you do get this core stamp. Remember, he can only get 2 stacks of excitement. So with the core stamp in effect, after applying poison twice, you're getting a 60% element mastery damage increase, and you're also now getting a 50% attack boost increase. That is very, very powerful. Again, must have core stamp for this character. And then he also does get an additional effect, which I think is actually very cool, is that when Mayuri receives fatal damage, he will melt into liquid and revive, and that can trigger every 2 minutes. It's rare for you to basically die in this game, so I'm not sure how useful that is going to be. But if there's any content in the future that maybe one-shots you, having Mayuri on the field is going to be very good. As of right now, the only 2 come to mind is that one-shot attack that the Ashisogi Jizo boss fight does do, and then maybe the Byakuya fight when he does do his Senkei attack if you can't destroy his petals fast enough. If you are ever in those situations, just switch to Mayuri and he will instantly revive. And that is a reference to the time he did it almost get one-shot by Uryu in the Soul Society arc. So it's kind of cool they turned that moment into an actual character mechanic with this unit. Now, that's not all, because the character gets surprisingly even more insane through the new stamp set that will be releasing alongside him. So the 2-piece effect is going to increase his ultimate charge rate by 33%. That's going to be really good, just again to get the, technique damage increase that comes with the ultimate effect. But the 3-piece effect might be the most craziest effect in the game right now, where if the wearer inflicts poison on the enemy, the entire team gains an attack increase by 44.4% for 30 seconds, which can stack up to 3 times. That is absolutely insane. So what this does potentially mean, if none of these numbers do change when the character releases, just by having the core stamp and also the stamp set, which of course you are going to use with this character, you can gain a 183% attack increase for the entire team. Alongside that, remember, through the core passive, you're also getting a 60% element mastery damage increase. You're getting a 25% technique damage increase, and he also does have a debuff where the enemies take more damage. His numbers are looking absolutely insane right now. Unsurprisingly, most of the damage increases here are not technically built into the character. It's instead seen through his core stamp and also 3-piece stamp effects. And then to wrap it up, if we have a look at his boundary ascension, because this can also get a little bit crazy, his first boundary is going to grant the entire team with an additional element damage increase, upwards to 25% of his ultimate charge rate. Now, this does have a maximum percentage, which we don't know, so it could go up to 50%, it could go up to 60%. Regardless, though, through the first duplicate, you are going to be able to grant more element damage for your team, and is strictly tied behind his ultimate charge rate percentage increase. And again, going back to his stamp set and also his core passive, he does have ways to naturally increase that. So likely with this character especially, but you'll probably do it at B0, but especially B1, is that the third stamp set, you're going to want to have ultimate charge rate. And if you do have the character at B1, ideally you are going to want to have a certain percentage to get the maximum amount of element damage that you can give to your entire team. His second duplicate, however, the ultimate, now grants an additional effect, which in this case is 30% more crit damage for 30 seconds. It can't stack, but still 30% crit damage is absolutely insane. On top of all the buffs that he already does have. His B4 isn't that crazy, but for Mayuri's technique, specifically his Flesh Bomb and also Superhuman Drug, it does additionally lower the enemy's spiritual pressure by a certain percentage. This is probably the weakest part about the character's boundary ascension. And then, of course, as expected, his final duplicate is going to be absolutely crazy, as it does increase the maximum stat count of excitement from 2 to 4. And remember, each excitement buff does increase your element damage and attack percentage. So like already mentioned, at B0, this character's attack percentage increase for the team can go up to 183%. Likewise, his element mastery can go up by 60%. While at B6, his attack percentage increase goes from 183 to 233%. And likewise, his element mastery can go up to 120% with more element damage from his B1, more crit damage from his B2, and you're also maybe more likely to lower their spiritual pressure gauge, where at that point you're also dealing more damage. So that pretty much wraps up Mayuri as a character. He is absolutely insane, and I'm actually very surprised at how good he is. I really thought these new support characters, as to maybe not make Kisuke absolutely obsolete, would be maybe a bit restrictive in terms of where they want to be used. Maybe they'd be a really good support character for a mono team, Frost, Strike, Slash, Spirit, for example, or as expected with Mayuri, we would maybe think he'd just be a really good element support character, which he is, don't get me wrong, but that 180% attack increase and the more technique damage might allow him to be good for non-element characters. We'll have to wait and see how that does play out, but at the very least though, he is looking to be absolutely insane with his offensive capabilities and again defensive capabilities for easily some of the best characters in the game right now: Nelio, Gin, potentially Grimjaw in the future, and of course also Kenpachi. And I think the good thing is that he's also really good at B0, but as expected just gets better with duplicates. I don't think B6 is a necessity or requirement for this character, but of course if you can get that, it's going to be even better. I think if anything, besides the Frost team, as it does have access to Nelio and also Gin, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of teams here are just going to be Mayuri, Kisuke, and then also your main damage dealer. I could easily see that being the best team for a character like Kenpachi, for example, until we maybe get a new Slash tactic. But either way, that's Mayuri. In the comments below, let me know what you guys think about him. I think he looks absolutely insane, and I'm definitely a lot more excited for the character based on these leaks. And again, the fact that it is a Wakemundo Mayuri. But I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. I'll see you guys next time. Take care and peace.